we've got Pouliot, we've got Tone Vays, we've got Pierre Rochard. It's about as toxic a group we can get. So can we just do the loudest applause we've had?
Make it real! Now session! It's taking over! Every paper money that's ever existed for 300 years has gone to zero! Since we started looking at Bitcoin, remember the Zimbabwe dollar went to zero. Now we've got the Bolivar. Everyone's bringing the Bolivar. It's going to zero. None have survived. Even the English pound has lost 99.9% of its value. Hello? All right, this is the final panel of the Honeybadger Conference 2019. We have a fantastic panel. It says simply on the program, final session, with no topic. So I thought, why not just come out here without a topic, or spring a topic? So one thing that Adam Back mentioned, and it's a good topic, I don't hear enough about it. Let's start off with game theory. Game theory. What does it mean to Bitcoin? What does it mean to the protocol? What does it mean to the ecosystem? How does it all work? Let's start on the far end with Saifedean Ammous. Your thoughts?
I happen to come from a very unpopular school of thought that believes game theory is not that important for the running of Bitcoin.
Thank you, Saifedean. That was really interesting. Let's move on to Tone Vays. Tone, your thoughts?
I actually love the game theory aspect of Bitcoin. I'm gonna keep it short, but this is one of the reasons why I've pretty much always been a Bitcoin maximalist, other than maybe 6 months in like early 2014. And since then, because that is the game theory side of it, to make it very simple, I was just thinking of a good analogy the other day. When people say, oh, my coin is better than Bitcoin, whether it's Bcash or whatever, I can name them all day. And what they don't realize is, just think about it this way. Imagine if, how many of you use more than one messaging app? Every hand better go up, right? Now imagine if all of your digital data, like your pictures and all your documents, was tied to that single messaging app, and you couldn't transfer them to another app. And you had to choose which messaging app all of your important digital data, because it scarce data like Bitcoin. You can only have it on one protocol. You can only have it on one blockchain. So you have to choose where those pictures are. And if you choose the wrong messenger, and less people use it, the quality of those pictures just starts to degrade, like the value of an old coin. And if everyone has their pictures on a single messenger, everyone will be using that one messenger. The game theory says you can't switch. And that's basically why I'm expecting Bitcoin to last.
Let's move on. Let's keep going. I'm sorry, Tim. We got a big panel here. We got to keep on. Yes, Francis, your thoughts. Game theory, big picture.
Right. So I mean, game theory is not like a technology. It's not something that Bitcoin is built on. It's a way to describe, the process of spontaneous coordination, which happens between the participants. It's a way to describe an economic reality, which is that greedy individuals using the tools that Satoshi built will spontaneously coordinate to whatever best outcome is best for them. And it just so happens that the tools that we built make so that what's best for one is best for all. And this is why the blogs keep coming out every 10 minutes, and this is why the rules have never changed. Yeah, I mean, I see that's the magic behind the consensus.
Right. Spontaneous coordination. Okay, that's a very interesting phrase. I think we might come back to that in a moment. Pierre, your thoughts?
So I agree with Saif, but I'll just take this opportunity to say that the game theory is clear. Bitcoin is going to destroy all the fiat currencies.
Very concise.
That's very clear.
So it seems that, for example, the New York Agreement, they ran into game theory. Spontaneous coordination and the interests of all trumped the interest of a few. And it seems like all the time the game theory is working its way up through the stack of corporations and governments and international organizations. In the beginning there was a fear that, there's too much minor concentration. And then that was no longer the fear. And then it became, there's these corporations in the New York Agreement, they're going to concentrate things and destroy things. The hard forks. Now we're at a stage where Bitcoin is on the radar now of international organizations, the Bank of International Settlements, the IMF, all the central banks, okay? We're no longer a toy. This is now seen as a threat. And so the game theory has to go to work against the biggest entities in the world. My thought, and curious what you guys think about this, is that we're entering now the final kind of showdown. Bitcoin versus the status quo that's been going on for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. I see you nodding your head, Pierre, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the strongest weapon that governments have is capital controls. If they want to try to slow down Bitcoin during this final game. So perhaps they will find it useful that they created a giant AML KYC panopticon, that they can have a kind of a turnkey solution there for capital controls and trying to prevent people from buying Bitcoin. But ultimately, the game theory, there's competing governments, and that's, I think, people understate the effect of that. And not only are there competing governments, but there's also competing bureaucrats and politicians within government who are competing for resources and for votes. So we see here in the US, the amount of competition between regulators, like between the CFTC or the SEC. One would ask, why are government entities competing with each other when they're part of the same government? Well, because humans are humans and they can't help themselves. And so anytime you have an in-group and an out-group, suddenly they start trying to find ways to argue with each other.
Right, Francis, when you look at these central banks around the world, they're entering a new period. I noticed that the Mark Carney over at the Bank of England recently criticized the US dollar and said it shouldn't really be the world reserve currency anymore. So there's a lot of breaking ranks in the central banks. Will we get to a point where one of these central banks starts adding Bitcoin to their strategic reserve and really break ranks? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Pierre. I mean, governments are complex entities that are formed of different agencies that have the different interests, so it's kind of hard to say government is going to do this or wants to do this or that. Kind of similar to the just central banking in general, you have multiple different entities, and they are indeed competing with each other, but we can't forget that they are all coordinating through institutions like the Bank of International Settlement and the International Monetary Fund, and it is through these institutions that they are, they're competing against each other, but ultimately, if a major fiat currency dramatically explodes, it's going to erode the confidence of every other person in the other countries. So I think the existence of Bitcoins limits the incentive for them to compete against each other, because if Bitcoin destroys one or one destroys itself, they will go to Bitcoin. And I also think that, Bitcoin has not really been attacked yet that much. SegWit2x was kind of a pretty big sauce as far as I'm concerned, and I don't think that the Bank of International Settlement, which to me is the avatar of evil, I don't think they go to sleep at night think, oh gosh darn it, those Bitcoiners, they won, might as well pack up our things. So I would caution people that the show really hasn't started yet, and I expect the things to start to heat up 5 to 10 years from now and get a little bit more intense.
Right, Tone, you do a lot of content in Bitcoin and around Bitcoin, and it was mentioned just the previous panel about the user-activated soft fork, and I know you and you guys at World Crypto Net were really, I think, fantastic in terms of educating the population about that. But as far as a media guy in Bitcoin, when I see Joe Kernan over at CNBC suddenly talking about Bitcoin and defending it against his other guests, is that game theory has now jumped into CNBC and he's carved out some space for himself to differentiate what he's doing in the media space? And is he now become a Bitcoin drone? He's now got the fever. He's now working for us now.
I'm sorry, who is that? I don't watch TNBC.
So Saifedean, we're going to skip Tone. Go right to Saifedean. Saifedean, if what we're saying is correct, and that the central banks are looking at this and the fiat currency's on the run, then the US dollar is going to reflect this reality at some point. And so you're an economics guru, you're a professor, you're an author. His book's been translated now into several languages Esperanto, I think, is the latest, Polish and Finnish. No, but the US dollar should reflect this. How is this going to impact economics globally?
I think it's a little too early to be doing our victory laps yet. Central banks aren't, I think, at any point in threat of understanding what this is all about. I think central bankers really are going to be the last people to get it because they are selected amongst the population as being the ones who believe the most in the state's prerogative for printing money. And so they're not going to take Bitcoin seriously for a while. And I hope we continue to get away with it without them taking it seriously, without them accumulating it or attacking it more seriously. And I think, there's a lot of room to go.
That would be a game theory, wouldn't it?
Not really, in a
Am I
sense.
right? Am I right? When I get a round of applause? Am I right? I'm right? No, that would be a shameless abuse of my power as the MC of this
It's okay.
panel.
No. Well, I will just respond with the point that ultimately, yes, you could call it game theory if you want, but it comes down to the monetary properties of the asset, and it's just people recognizing these monetary properties. It's not about people recognizing others recognizing it. That there is an element to that, but it really is about the monetary properties and the fact that this really is a neutral protocol and a neutral algorithm, which is something that makes it attractive to everybody, including eventually, I think, anybody within a position of central bank and so on, even on an individual basis. It's just a more powerful technology for doing things. And that, I think, is the more important thing. Now, yes, you could think about the game theory of how other people think others are thinking about it, but sure.
Okay, cool.
I'm gonna disagree with Saif again. I think a central bank picking up Bitcoin is going to be sooner than later. To me, the question is it going to be like a small country that the U.S. can then sanction and like show the world why you don't want to do this, or is it going to be a more serious country that the U.S. can't do anything to? But I do think it's going to happen sooner than later.
All right, thanks, Tom. Pierre, you were something to jump in.
Saif in his presentation, he mentioned that central banks and governments could compete with Bitcoin by having a sounder monetary policy. But they're completely clueless, so they're trying to compete with Bitcoin by having better payments. So they're going out and figuring out, all right, how can we make payments instantaneous and cheap? That way we can compete against Bitcoin, because they don't really understand.
They're competing with Bitcoin Cash, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Your money is run by Dcashers, so and so that's why I don't think that they're going to have the ideological, common sense to be able to compete with Bitcoin and tighten up their monetary policy.
The KYC and AML on-ramps and off-ramps and all the regulations and all of the regulators around the world, of course, they're funded with fiat. And as fiat becomes worthless, they lose their jobs and we win. Right? Yeah, that's perfect. So, going back to 2011, when Stacy and I were first getting into Bitcoin, I would say that 90% of the talk was about the technology. Here in 2019, the talk is about money. Bitcoin is money, and to a large extent, but to a large degree, because of Saifedean's book, because he became he defined the economic school that is the economic school of Bitcoin, or began that process. And Francis, your story in Bitcoin, when you started, did you think you'd get to a point where you'd be trying to understand the economics of it and go through the Austrian School of Economics, and walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, kind of ironically, I was working as an economist before Bitcoin, but I was not really exposed to Austrian economics that much. They don't teach it in university at all. I was fortunate enough to intern at the Institute of Economic Affairs in the UK, which is an Austrian economics institute. It's really through understanding it's really through living Bitcoin that I understood this spontaneous coordination that Hayek was talking about in this concept galaxy. When I first started to understand the Bitcoin consensus mechanism and just seeing myself as a participant in this and in an unrestricted free market, analyzing my own thought process, that's when I really truly understood it. And I think that one of the killer apps of Bitcoin is to make Austrian economics mainstream.
Cool. Tone, you're traveling the world, and you talk to a lot of folks, and you're educating a lot of folks around the world. You have something coming up in Bali, I believe. You can look that up and see what Tone's up to. It's exciting stuff. What do you find when you're educating people is the biggest kind of speed bump that they need to get over, understand?
Man, I think the biggest one is people want their things to be like physical form and backed by something. It's really hard to explain to a person that what gives Bitcoin value is the fact that it doesn't have a physical form. That's what makes it unconfiscatable. That's what makes it censorship resistant. And it's just really hard to explain how that's secured and why that is the part that gives it probably the most value, the fact that you can't touch it. I think that's been the hardest part for me to explain to people.
You know, I think about Bitcoin a lot, of course, because I've got Bitcoin derangement syndrome like some of the others. And sometimes I think about it as, if you look at the history of corporations and industry, a lot of things were created by accident, like plastic or, you know, Viagra was originally for hypertension, and then it became something else. You know, there's a lot of industrial accidents. It's almost as if, I tweeted this, that, you know, it's like Bitcoin is actually an accident. These developers are trying to solve the double spend problem, and, you know, they released this program, and it was kind of an odd thing, and then all of a sudden, you know, it blossomed into the hardest money ever known in the universe. What do you think of that analysis, Pierre?
I think that's entirely accurate. And if you go look at Satoshi's white paper, he doesn't say anything about there being a limit of 21 million Bitcoins. He doesn't talk about the halvings or anything like that. To him, I think he was singularly focused on the issue of a double spend, and it makes sense given where the state of the art was in terms of cypherpunk eCash at the time.
It could be part of the reason why there's a little bit disconnect in terms of people understanding it. The feedback I got with my tweet was a lot of cypherpunks jumped on and said, "No, you're wrong. It's 20 years in the making, and here's the, you know, 56 million footnotes, and go through these." But anyway, that's it. Okay. I embrace that. Francis, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's totally correct. There's a word in English that describes this when something happens by accident and you can't reproduce. I can't think about a serendipity. Right? Bitcoin is very serendipitous, and I think we got quite lucky in a few things. And the most important thing is the Bitcoin monetary policy. As Pierre pointed out, it's not specified in the white paper, and you know, I'm kind of fascinated with cypherpunk history, and it's not impossible to me that Satoshi wanted to have a linear inflation curve or have some kind of inflation in it. And that would have made Bitcoin not socially scalable, because then the hot topic would have been, what's the fork that we're going to do to change the monetary policy? And you know, for the story, I don't have any evidence to back this up, but I have some kind of intuition that it's Hal Finney that convinced Satoshi to put supply curve just based on their exchanges, and the fact that, you know, when the code was launched, it was baked in there. If it had been otherwise, maybe this you know, fateful accident wouldn't have occurred.
Tom, the divine accident theory?
No, I think it was, if it's an accident, I mean, it was amazing that they actually saw that it would be money, and pretty much the only use case so far has been money. So maybe solving the double spend problem might have been an accident, but realizing what it's going to be and the use case is going to be money, that was very carefully thought of and very well planned. Though I have to slightly disagree with Francis, I don't think the monetary policy was ideal. I'm not a fan of these halvings at all. I'm okay with the 21 million cap, but I don't like the economic shock, the shock to a mining operation. I mean, it's kind of fun. We can talk about it for like 2 years out, and it's like a big party event, but from a business perspective, I don't like that shock to your business.
Why not? Because it seems ingenious.
It could have been smoothed out. It could have like slightly reduced the mining reward every 2 weeks whenever the difficulty adjusts. It could have also slightly lowered it to just remove that shock.
Your thoughts on this, Saifedean?
I think the technological innovation was the solving of the double spend problem, but how much Satoshi understood about the implications of being able to solve this is what's not clear. He doesn't really give it away very much in the white paper or in his discussions about what he really thought of this in general, but it seems clear that he viewed that it could scale to a very high level. And in a sense, that makes you think that, yeah, that he did have a vision, I think, of the clear value of digital cash as being